In 2021, the EU boasted a GDP of around $15.2 trillion, firmly establishing it as the world's second largest economy. ASEAN, on the other hand, registered a GDP of $3.2 trillion in the same year. However, real GDP growth averaged 1% per year in the EU compared with 5.1% in ASEAN. The latter have shown promising economic growth and potential. But will they need to be more like the EU if they want to keep thriving? I'll tell you right now, ASEAN won't want to. And it all comes down to one thing. But first, let's go over how similar they are to each other. Both are regional organizations with legal personalities, both were founded to promote peace, both seek to integrate the economies of their members into a single market and production platform, both share commitment to human rights, both entered into many free trade agreements or economic partnership agreements with other countries, and both hold regular political dialogues with important external partners. There are some minute differences in the similarities pointed out, such as the number of members and why they were founded, but the biggest difference is how they deal with member countries violating human rights. The EU will put pressure on countries to improve their human rights records by means of trade and development assistance, whereas ASEAN operates on the principle of non-interference and does not believe in using sanctions. This is because ASEAN is an intergovernmental organization, whereas the EU is supranational, meaning that ASEAN members do not surrender any power or sovereignty to a higher level. Decisions and agreements reached in ASEAN, such as a commitment to human rights, are not enforceable, which means members cannot interfere with other members' affairs. This is why ASEAN cannot confront Myanmar on the humanitarian crisis and can only aid the Rohingya refugees. And if ASEAN were a supranational organization like the EU, it would likely have fewer or no members because of the conflicts over political ideology among the member states. This is only one of the four major differences that sets ASEAN apart from the EU. And if ASEAN wants to become an economic powerhouse soon, they may need to adopt the EU's approach on things. Also, stick around until the end to find out what the bonus difference is. So what are the other differences between ASEAN and the EU? Well, the next is that the EU has a parliament, whereas ASEAN does not. The European Parliament has three main roles: legislative, such as passing laws; supervisory, such as democratic scrutiny of all institutions; and budgetary, such as establishing a budget. This is in contrast to ASEAN's Interparliamentary Assembly, which serves as more of a forum to discuss regional issues, promote cooperation, and strengthen ties among member countries. An issue with this is that it only socializes decisions and policies and doesn't have any power to enforce them. Repeated calls to elevate AIPA to a full-fledged regional parliament repeatedly came from the Philippines to combat this issue, yet it has been rejected by the majority of ASEAN members. Why? Because it requires them to cede authority to an institution. By now, you should have an idea on what the common factor is between these differences. But if you still don't, you will after the next two. The third difference is that the EU has a very powerful secretariat called the European Commission. The ASEAN Secretariat pales in comparison. Think of it as the coordinator of the organization. They provide administrative support by organizing meetings and documents, and implements policies and decisions made by the member states. Although the EU Commission has more responsibilities, the main difference is that ASEAN does not have legislative or executive powers to actually implement policies. Why they're careful about empowering their secretariat is because they don't want to surrender the decision-making power to a group of bureaucrats. And the last difference is that in ASEAN, all decisions are made by consensus. The EU, however, can decide by taking votes. ASEAN ensures that all the member states receive benefits from the decisions. It is in contrast with the EU that has the power to make decisions that can negatively affect certain member states rather than serve the common interests of each state. Why ASEAN prefers consensus is because it prevents tyranny, a government in which almost all power is in the hands of a single institution. So have you figured it out yet? The reason why ASEAN does not want to be like the EU is because it all comes down to control. ASEAN members are not willing to let others make decisions for them. But is giving up some sovereignty really a bad idea though? Look at the EU. With a supranational government, a parliament, and a powerful secretariat, they were able to become the second largest economy in the world, despite some ups and downs. That might be true. However, just because it works for them doesn't mean it will work for others. ASEAN members are politically and economically more different to each other than their European counterparts. This is an issue. Let's say ASEAN is facing an economic crisis and a decision needs to be made to deal with it. However, because of a developmental gap between member countries, this decision could help poorer members but significantly hinder those that are richer. Similarly, if ASEAN decides on a declaration, diverse political interests due to the respecting of cultural norm in the region makes everyone agreeing difficult. No one wants a decision that will disadvantage them. Therefore, ASEAN members would rather deal with it individually. But sometimes the best decisions need sacrifices, which is what ASEAN needs to realize. ASEAN will not be like the EU anytime soon. However, the EU can still be used as a reference point rather than a model, copying what works and avoiding what doesn't. But what do you think? Will ASEAN be like the EU in the future? Or will they thrive in their own way? Finally, if you're wondering what the extra one is, it is that the EU has a common currency whereas ASEAN does not. But to find out the pros and cons, watch this video where I explain in detail what would happen if ASEAN used one currency, because ironically, it's a coin toss.